Great Lakes here. This video is a little different from my usual stuff, but I believe that DIY and self-sufficiency in general is right in line with what this channel is all about. Doing something for yourself instead of having to rely on someone else. And that includes DIY home improvements. As it happens, I was a professional house painter for many years. In that time, I painted everything from Section 8 apartments to million-dollar mansions. I learned a lot about why most people hate house painting, why their paint jobs often come out looking bad, and how retail companies use that to sell you crappy products. So in this video, I'm going to share my top tips for getting more professional looking results and hopefully getting a lot less frustrated in the process. Tip number 1, avoid gimmicky gadgets. There are a million products out there for cutting in trim lines, rolling paint, and everything else. These are usually crappy, messy products that are never the miracle solution you hoped for. Being good at painting is like anything else. It comes with a little practice and patience. For instance, you know how professionals cut in trim lines in paint molding? With a brush, freehand. If you practice, you can do it too. Stop taping off every last thing in your entire house. Just tape off the stuff that would be permanently ruined if paint gets on it. Stop buying ridiculous gimmick products. Spend $15 or $20 on a good angle brush and practice cutting in freehand. You'll use this skill for the rest of your life, and if you take care of that brush, you may never need another one. And that brings us right into our next tip. Tip number 2, use a quality brush. A good paintbrush makes such a huge difference in the quality of your paint job and in the ease of doing the paint job. You may cringe at the idea of spending $15 or $20 on a paintbrush, but it's so worth it. Stay away from those $6 brushes that will shed bristles all over your wall and be impossible to fully clean. Just go with a Purdy or a Wooster. I recommend a 2-inch or 3-inch angle brush. Take care of your brush and it'll last for years. If you see a lot of paint drying and caking on it, take a break and wash the brush. After you're done for the day, wash the brush. For latex paint, you just need water. Get the majority of the paint out of the brush by pressing the bristles repeatedly against the bottom of the sink under a running faucet. Then press the brush right into the running faucet, squeezing the bristles gently. Do this repeatedly until the water runs clear. Now shake as much water as you can out of it or tap it gently against the toe of your shoe. Use a brush comb or the edge of a spackle blade to straighten out any bristles that may have gotten bent or tangled. And store your brush in its original cardboard case. Don't get lazy on this step. Just clean your brush and clean it right. There's nothing about a paint job that's fast or convenient, so you might as well pace yourself and take the time to do it the right way. Tip number 3, use a quality roller cover. I can't stress this one enough. People like to buy the cheapo pack of 3 roller covers for $5 or whatever, and their paint job and sanity suffer for it. A better roller cover will hold more paint. It'll apply paint more smoothly and evenly. It won't shed fuzz all over your wall, and it will not burn out as quickly. If a single roller cover doesn't cost at least $5, it's probably crap. And you know, the difference in price between crap and great isn't really that much. Go with a 3/8 inch or 1/2 inch nap for regular walls and ceilings. My favorites are the 1/2 inch Wooster Pro and the Purdy White Dove roller covers. A quick note about storing and cleaning your covers. If you're going to be changing paint colors a lot, it might be worth cleaning your covers and reusing them. Use a 5-in-1 painter's tool to scrape as much paint out of it as possible, and then just rinse and rub the cover under the sink until the water runs completely clear. If you're not going to clean it completely, don't even bother. Just throw it away at that point. If you want to save a cover between coats, or if you have to stop for the day but you'll use the same color tomorrow, you can save the cover for up to a few days. Just load the cover up with some paint and carefully put it into a gallon Ziploc bag. Then put that bag in the fridge. The cool temperature and sealed bag will keep the paint from drying. I only recommend doing this for a couple days, but I will say that I forgot about a roller cover in my bottom drawer for about 6 months once, and when I pulled it out, it seemed completely usable. Tip number 4, forget about those little trays. As with brushes and rollers, people have a tendency to cheap out when it comes to a paint tray, also called a pan. They'll buy the smallest, cheapest tray and then get a bunch of flimsy, pointless plastic liners to go in it. This is all a recipe for a bad experience and wasted money. These small trays are hardly wider than your roller, and they hardly hold any paint. You have too little room to work the roller, and you'll be refilling the tray constantly. Fortunately, there are two great alternative options. First, get a large paint tray. They make oversized, heavy-duty contractor trays. They hold plenty of paint, and they give you tons of room to work and load up your roller. I've had this tray for probably 15 years. I use it for any smaller job that only requires a gallon or two of paint. When finished, I just wash off any paint that hasn't already dried, and it's good for the next time. Spend $10 or $15 on one of these and never buy another flimsy paint tray or liner again. For larger jobs that will require 2 or more gallons, I go with option 2, a 5-gallon bucket and a metal screen. These work tremendously well because you can fill your bucket with 2 or 3 or 4 gallons of paint at a time and easily move it around the room as you go. Once you get the hang of loading up your roller with the metal screen without making a mess, dipping is a breeze. Tip number 5, go to a real paint store. The Sherwin-Williams paint at a Lowe's is not the same as the Sherwin-Williams paint at a Sherwin-Williams store. It's licensed by Lowe's or whoever, and it's made specially for homeowners who don't know any better. They market it as a paint and primer combo, which is often not actually very good. It's as thick as pudding and it sucks to paint with. Not only that, but you'll end up needing 2 coats anyway. You simply can't cover up some colors with other colors. So why do they make this fake Sherwin thick pudding paint? Well, it goes on thick and you blow through a ton of paint. Gotta buy more paint. Also, a big reason why people really hate painting is because of the drips after dipping their roller. Well, if you're dipping your roller in chocolate pudding, it's basically too thick to drip. It gives the customer the impression that it must be better because they're not as frustrated while using it. Well, speaking as a professional, it really frustrates me when I have to roll the same dip out 100 times and it still only covers 8 square feet of wall. So you buy fake Sherwin paint or whatever Home Depot or Ace Hardware's branded licensed version is. You probably bought twice as much as you would have needed, and you ended up needing 2 coats anyway. Now you have 2 thick coats of pudding on your walls, which is literally a coating of thick, soft rubber. If you're using anything other than flat paint, it's going to scratch more easily and chip off if you even look at it too hard. Again, thicker is not better. Better is better. So just go to a Sherwin-Williams store. I highly recommend their Super Paint line, or just ask them for their recommendation. Tip number 6, flatter looks better. Use the flattest sheen you can get away with. Flat paint has no sheen or shine to it. This means the light doesn't reflect off of it nearly as much as a shinier finish would. This also means that every little imperfection isn't nearly as noticeable. When light catches on every angle of every nick, ding, dent, or lump, it makes the wall look bad. A clean, flat surface is the most visually appealing and is the least annoying when it comes to your room light glaring and reflecting off of it. The drawback to flat paint, however, is that it's not as washable. That being said, a high-quality flat paint, like Super Paint from Sherwin-Williams, is pretty washable, and it doesn't get scuffed up nearly as easily as cheap flat paint. If you need your room to be more washable and stain-resistant, you might want to go with an eggshell or satin sheen. It will have a little bit of shine to it, but that shine makes it more washable. This is probably advisable for kids' rooms or any rooms that are at a higher risk of getting really messy. Paint with a higher sheen is also more resistant to moisture stains and damage. Use satin or semi-gloss for bathrooms and kitchens, since the glossier paint is more resistant to moisture and stuff like grease can be more easily washed off. Also, flat paint on the ceiling is always better visually. A shiny ceiling never looks that great. I would only use a non-flat paint on a ceiling in a bathroom, a kitchen, or any other room where there could be a lot of water, steam, grease, or other moisture. Tip number 7, caulk gaps and cracks. Caulk cracks and gaps around molding, windows, and even corners. This single step can take a paint job from okay to fantastic. It really gives your room a finished look when you don't have any ugly cracks and gaps around your trim work. Caulk anything that will be painted. Use a regular latex painter's caulk. My favorite is the DAP Alex Painter's Caulk. If you've never caulked before, I really recommend practicing a bit on something first. You need to get a feel for the caulk gun, and it's important to lay a smooth, consistent bead. After you lay the bead, run your finger along the caulk line to smooth it out, and then wipe your finger clean after each pass with a rag or a sponge. Also, be sure to scrape out any old cracking caulk or flaking paint with the corner of a spackle blade or a 5-in-1 tool before you start adding new caulk. And a quick bonus tip, There's a million different caulk guns on the market, but my personal favorite is the regular cheap orange Home Depot brand caulk gun. I don't know why, but that caulk gun just works great. Tip number 8, box your paint. Boxing paint really just means mixing it together. Combine multiple cans of the same color paint together in a larger bucket. Even though each can of the same color paint should be the exact same color, it isn't always 100% exact. It's better these days since most of the color mixing at stores is computerized, but there's still a potential margin of error. If you work from one can and then halfway through a wall you run out and start into a second can, you can see that difference on your wall. Just mix them together and pour what you need into a tray or smaller bucket. Tip number 9, tape your roller covers. While a quality roller cover will not shed lint and fuzz as you're using it, there's always a small amount of lint or crud or loose fibers from the factory on a new cover. Just take some regular masking tape and wrap it completely around the cover. Squish and squeeze it a little bit and then remove the tape. Now your roller cover is ready to use. Tip number 10, primer is for patches. Use primer for patchwork and bare drywall. If you've just got a few patches to prime, you can just use flat paint. Paint sold as ceiling paint is flat paint, and it'll work just fine for priming patches instead of having to go out and buy an entire separate gallon of something called primer. Primer is sort of like watered down flat paint. Never prime patchwork or bare drywall with anything that has a sheen. Flat paint only. If you are painting over walls that are already painted, you probably don't need to use a primer. Unless you're trying to cover up water damage or heavy stains from nicotine or something else, primer will be a waste of money and time. Just put 2 coats of your new paint over top of the old paint. If you're trying to cover up stains, you wouldn't use regular primer anyway. You'd have to use a stain blocking primer made specifically for that purpose. Which brings us right into the next tip. Tip number 11, stain blocking primer. Different from regular primer, stain blocking primer is necessary for serious stains. If you have stains from water damage, nicotine, blood, ink, grease, or anything like that, no type of regular latex paint or primer is going to cover it. It might look like it's covering it, but that stain will reappear as soon as the paint dries. For this, you need to use a stain blocking primer. Kills and Zinsser are the 2 popular brands of this. Now, both brands come in an oil-based or a latex-based version. The original oil-based formula is the most hardcore stain blocking product out there. It'll cover up the sins of mankind itself if you need it to. But I'll never use it again. It's so stinky, toxic, and horrible to use that it's just not worth it. You might as well throw out any brush, roller, bucket, or house that even touches it, and you'll be as high as a kite after priming a single room. Instead, use the latex-based version. It works well, but if you have pretty stained walls or ceilings, you'll probably need to use 2 coats. It's definitely worth it though not to have brain damage from breathing in that original formula. Lastly, if you only have 1 or 2 small stains on your walls, you can also buy these products in a spray can version. Tip number 12, dip frequently. If there was only one single piece of painting advice I could give, this would be it. You're not dipping often enough, and it's killing your paint job. I've come to believe that most of the reasons people hate painting stem from dipping. I'm talking about each time you put more paint on your roller or brush. Each time you put your roller in the pan or your brush in the bucket, that's a dip. Novice painters seem to hate dipping for 2 reasons. First, because they feel like it's slowing them down. And second, because that's when they're dripping paint on the floor the most. But I promise your paint job will go so much better if you just dip more often. With your brush, dip a little in, scrape the excess from all sides, and apply until it starts to resist from lack of paint. Don't go back and forth 20 times with your brush to force every last little molecule out of it. Just dip it again. With your roller, and this is where I really hope people will pay attention. Stop pressing down and squeezing the life out of it with each dip. As soon as you feel like you'd have to start shoving that roller against the wall to brute force more paint out of it, that's when you should be dipping again. You should only expect to get a couple vertical rows from each dip. Pushing and squishing that roller cover into the wall is only going to achieve 2 things. It's going to burn your roller out very quickly, which in turn will hold even less paint, and it's going to make your paint job look bad. It can make your wall look splotchy, and it will leave rope lines on your wall. Rope lines are the long ridges of paint that come from the edges of your roller when you press unevenly or too hard. So I say again, dip your brush and roller more often. Don't rush it. Don't put too much paint on it. Improve your technique so you don't drip. But stop murdering those defenseless roller covers. Quick bonus tip. This should go without saying, but I still see people doing it the hard way all the time. Use a stick for your roller. Get an extendable stick or just a cheap fixed length stick. Using a 4-foot stick, for instance, allows you to go all the way up and down the wall without crouching, kneeling, or getting on a ladder. Plus, you have much better leverage than just holding that roller frame in your hand. And for ceilings, it's an absolute must. I can't believe my eyes anytime I see someone up on a stepladder rolling a ceiling in tiny little bits with that roller handle. It's got threads in it for a reason. Use a stick. Tip number 13. Apply 2 coats. Forget about that cheap paint that brands itself as all-in-one paint and primer. Unless you're painting over the exact same color and sheen, count on needing 2 coats. Covering the old color is not about how thick the paint is or about how thick you apply it. It's about having 2 coats and allowing the first coat to dry in between. You need 2 layers of paint, not 1 thick layer. That's just how it works. 2 coats of quality paint will cover almost any color, with a few exceptions. If you're trying to cover a deep color, like a maroon for instance, you may need additional coats. It's better to apply the coat thinner rather than thicker. With a thick coat, you risk the paint dripping and sagging down the wall, and it will just generally look less crisp and clean. Plus, you will blow through more paint and still end up needing 2 coats anyway. Just like in any profession, there's a lot of lingo in the painting field, but the one I've always found the strangest is holiday. A holiday is what happens when your roller doesn't fully cover an area of wall with paint. After the paint dries, you'll notice little speckly areas where the old color is showing through. These spots are called holidays. The only explanation I've ever heard for this phrase is, when you're rolling, the paint takes a little holiday. It's pretty silly, but I didn't come up with it. The point is, when you do 1 coat, you're pretty much guaranteeing holidays, even with a thick coat and plenty of back rolling. So again, plan on doing 2 lighter coats, but be sure not to burn out that roller cover. Tip number 14, ceiling, walls, molding. It should go without saying that you should start with the ceiling first. Tiny speckles of paint will end up on your walls after doing the ceiling, so work top to bottom. If my trim work will be getting a different color, I always do that last. Floor molding, door frames, window sills, etc. I've heard people suggest that you should do the trim work before the walls because it's easier to cut in walls than the small edge of molding. While that's true, I still recommend doing the trim work last if you're able. You'll end up showering that floor molding with tiny speckles of wall paint that fleck off from the spinning roller, and you'll probably have to repaint them anyway. Tip number 15, avoid meat marks. Meat marks are the discolored looking areas that can result from overlapping fresh wet paint with paint that's already dried. To avoid this, make sure to go all the way up and down the wall with your roller, from floor to ceiling, with each dip. For ceilings, do full wall-to-wall sections of ceiling. Do a couple rows, then move to the other side of the room. This can get trickier if you have a huge ceiling and you can't do it in 2 passes, but do the best you can. Luckily, flat paint, which is usually used for ceilings anyway, is at less risk for meat marks than shinier paint. In conclusion, there's no rushing a quality paint job. Take your time, do everything the right way, and give yourself plenty of time to do it. The reason that professional paint jobs are so expensive is the same reason why any professional job is expensive. You're not only paying for manual, physical labor, you're paying for thousands of hours of experience, knowledge, and higher quality equipment. There's usually no shortcuts to doing it the right way. So if you want to save a ton of money, you have to invest your time. So get the best results from all that time you'll be spending and follow these tips. That's it for now. If you enjoyed this video, click the subscribe button and stay up to date on all our latest videos. Thanks for watching and for all of your continued support. And until next time, this is Great Lakes Prepping.